bring up one more question that you guys have inspired in my mind, and then maybe we'll do a couple closing remarks after that. But my question is, and Lori, you've mentioned it, and Michael, you brought it up, the concept of constraint or impact to create change, that urgent burning platform, if you want to use John Cotter's words. What is it that creates that case for change? And the reason I want to talk about that is because if you look at an example would be safety statistics and human performance. Nobody has necessarily, let me step back from that. I'm going to go back to UK COMA legislation. So the way the United Kingdom has started to regulate major accident sites is through the learnings of a history of disasters from Flicksborough up. And so they've every time that there's a major industrial disaster, they look at their regulations and they update them. It's reactive. It ends up being a learning response to something horrific happening. And so my question is, how do we get ahead of that and do something like Apple did, which is bring out revolutionary products before anybody even knows that there is a constraint or a need for them. And especially in the safety space, when you look at human performance and some of these, safety 2 concepts and mindsets, that's about getting more proactive in the case for change and changing before your platform catches fire, so to speak. So thoughts on that, on constraints and on drive to create change, and how do we get more proactive in that space?
Lori, I have a thought first that I'm willing to put into our mix, because I expect that this will probably stimulate some thought in both of you, which is one of the things we need to get a lot better at is simulations. Creating simulations. Now, the oil and gas industry in particular is getting much better about it. Industrial organizations are getting much better at it. The things that are created to be able to produce digital twins, for example, digital twin-based prediction added to simulation is creating essentially a form of scenario planning, collective reality-based scenario planning. And I've been experimenting with that, not so much in terms of what would be happening in a control room, for example, on a drilling platform, but more so in what would be happening in terms of the social dynamics during a transformation on a physical site. And in that context, what we know is going to happen, for example, if we're driving a transformation of a physical site, we know that there's going to be conversations we're going to need to have with people down the line. Well, one of the things that we've been experimenting with, I think quite successfully, is creating simulations of those future conversations and knowing when they will go off rails, because we're human beings and things go off the rails in terms of conversation and those kind of social dynamics.
So are you saying you've created a gossip simulator?
Yes, a gossip simulator. That's ideal. Yeah. But in some respects, gossip is just a reflection of the story being told in an organization. Mm-hmm. And the story that's being told in the organization in the context of transformation is critical. And if you, as a leader of an organization, are not taking responsibility for the narrative that's being spoken of within your site, then you're not actually taking responsibility for the transformation. And you're not necessarily equipping yourself with the right tools and understandings to be able to shape that dialogue. And if you're not cascading, at the very, very least, the conversations that you want people to have and not allowing space for the real dialogue that's happening, what happens in regard to transformation is some people will say, well, these people are on board and here are the resistors. And therefore, the only people that count in terms of the narrative are these people that are already on board. Well, remember, the narrative exists beyond just the people who are on board. And the narrative, while it may feel like a resistance to you, it is a narrative that's going to influence the transformation. So if you're not interacting with, quote, the resistor narrative, then you're leaving a part of the organizational reality out of the equation for change. And that is just foolhardy in my sense. How's that resonate with you, Teresa?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I love the concept of embracing the full scale of the social narrative. And I think getting and you know this as well as I do, when you start looking at the spectrum of early adopters and late adopters and all that the whole change sphere, that you don't necessarily target your tailing end. But at the same time, if you're not addressing that conversation, as you say, people seek out that information and it becomes part of the narrative that becomes totally either incorrect or uncontrolled or underinformed. So I really like the idea of really starting to look at the entire landscape and leaning into the uncomfortable conversations in order to keep the dialogue open. It actually underpins even the concept of psychological safety, right? We're able to talk about the hard stuff too.
Right. And there's the gossip simulation, right? Where a leader has to go through an exercise of practicing being in that conversation with that person that they view as a resistor. And so there's a mindset shift of not holding them as a resistor, but a very, very valuable source of data that needs to be taken in order to really, really fully address the needs of the transformation.
Absolutely. Lori, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was gonna tell you that I can't go after Michael on a topic like that, obviously. So I have a slightly different twist, and maybe this will be a good way to bring the conversation to a full circle. But I learned about a decade ago from a really incredible leader, and he looked at me and he said, as you're talking to folks, listen to what folks are saying, but more importantly, what they're not saying. And so, and I thought that through, and I think to myself, that's for me the story. Perception is a reality to someone, right? And we know that. And so, what I've tried to do over the last decade or so, and it's only because I've been trying to learn how to do this, is the definition of resistor has to change. It needs to be changed to, that is a person with a perception that's different than mine. And I actually now need those people or that person to be part of the solution. And so I've, if anybody watches this video that's been on my teams or in my organizations are probably laughing, right? But when you have a conversation and you have somebody that's right here, and according to the rest of the group, they're out in left field, the best thing you can do as the leader is to pull that person in and say, okay, I need your help. You're part of the solution. You need to help us, right? I can't stress that more. You're actually going to be the most valuable person on this team to help us set the new direction, because you're going to bring a perspective that's different than mine. And so for me, it's about thinking about change differently. And again, this is, me learning, but change management, we have a perfect change curve and everybody knows it, and it's all the different stages and it happens in order, and you have resistors and you have the early adopters. And I like that because it helps us have the right conversation with the same terminology. And then now I'm here to say, to get through the massive change that we do need to get through, and to really bring on that innovation and use incrementalization and incrementalism to bring folks along, we have to think about that change curve differently even, right? So now my resistors and my early adopters, they need to become best friends. So what can I do to help them be best friends? And they don't have to be best friends as in they do everything outside of work together, but they need to be best friends as in we need to figure out what the causal reason is for X effect that is visible and observable that's causing a problem that led to an incident. And I need both of those folks on the team.
I love it. I think we've come full circle. Michael, any closing remarks before I wrap us up?
Well, I love this conversation. And when I think about what I understand of each one of our roles in the world and where we are in our careers, it feels like we are in a place where we've done enough incrementalism to get to the place of recognizing its value. And we also recognize that we're under, both the industries we serve and the planet we're on are in a place where that is not going to suffice. And so orienting to transformation absolutely needs to to use an expression, transcend and include incrementalism and bring incrementalism to the place where it truly is serving transformation rather than being a competing force. But the way that we are going to do that is not necessarily by somehow creating some type of elegant integration between transformation models and Lean Six Sigma. It's really about shifting the mindsets in which we hold all these understandings and methodologies, so that the mindset that we hold all these with is in fact big enough to be able to hold them as integrated wholes rather than just a bunch of parts and pieces we're trying to cobble together.
Excellent. So at the risk of oversimplifying, get out your buzzword bingo card, because I think what was interesting about this conversation is it encapsulated human performance, continuous improvement, diversity and inclusion, and how that works. A whole bunch of talk about different methods of change and how that can get managed. And I think if I was to summarize it all, we're not quite ready to put a death knell on continuous improvement, as it's an underpinning element to transformational change, while acknowledging that transformation takes a different mindset, a different way of incorporating different perspectives into one problem-solving area. And that at the end of the day, we've got to keep our eyes on the road while we're reading our book, and pay attention to the simulated gossip coming out of our digital twins. So thank you very much, you guys. It was a real pleasure.